listening to the Adventuring Party for the 4th week of September 2023. This week, party look for adventure in places once grand, now in need of restoration grants. The Adventuring Party is listening to Tabletop and Radio Gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm a Warrior Scar, despoiler of every brick upon one brick that I ever see.
I'm Dave. I've been known to do things with bricks occasionally. Not quite despoiling, but you can certainly change up a place with a bit of despoiling.
Yeah, it's a new architectural phenomenon sweeping the continent, much like my army. But yes, we're here today to discuss unusual locations in your RPG and what they can do for you in setting up your game. So I guess this is a sort of GM facing episode. Although if you're a player and this sounds really cool, you should probably bug your GM to read some architectural manuals. I think the reason we came up with this idea is we were hearing about the World's Fair, and so that it's this sort of get together of all the great civilized countries of the world to pick a city, build a whole bunch of stuff, talking about science and how our country is great, and let's compare our science and engineering measured from the base and all. And then there's these structures would stand for a little while, and then slowly over time they decay. So you get these big cities, or sometimes sort of middling cities, depending on how the hosts wanted their cities to get the tourism boost. Yeah, you get these cities, and they just have these weird architectural dead ends in the middle of them that no one's really using, or have been completely remodeled into new buildings. So there's signs of, you look up at the wall and there's a place where all the flags of the world and all the symbols of modernity were once plastered on the side of the wall, but that's been currently scraped over, and now it's a parking garage or something.
Yeah, you can end up with some interesting mismatches there, or perfect matches depending on your view. Another related kind of thing that comes to mind is Olympic state areas.
Oh yeah,
because there are some truly cursed photos from like Olympics past, venues of Olympics past that have not been well maintained. Let's just say.
Yeah, because like the average, like even a major city, I think even like something like London is only posted like 3 times in what 120 years at this point, I suppose. And every like it's decades between things. So you build all this infrastructure for the great event, and you try to use it. You try to use it for all kinds of stuff, but what's useful to everyday life is what wins out often, and the big showy stuff just pad a contracting job that can often get abandoned or completely repurposed, or just broken down for bricks and used to build something else. Which brings to the point of, I don't think this is necessarily a new phenomenon, because you'll find all kinds of pieces of the great empires of history have sort of disappeared, been remodeled themselves. Many a Roman spa town has sunk underneath the waters, as the lakes they were once resorts next to have been dammed up over the years. And Rome itself had all kinds of remodeling going on in it. I believe there was one point where the Colosseum, it was either Colosseum or something like the Colosseum, was like re-renovated into like a miniature town, and a lot of the rest of Rome was abandoned just because no one wanted to take care of the stuff. This was been around like the middle 8th century or something. What we're getting at this point is a interesting way to look at the venues that your group visits in an RPG to spice it up would be to use unusual abandoned structures or repurposed structures as a way to spice up things, or to put this random collection of rooms into a new context. You'll see an awful lot of advice online about how you should lay out the rooms of any given dungeon. You should have it either be like linear, as like a 5-room, one-shot night experience, or others will say, oh, it should be a big mega dungeon that's all linked and decayed and all of that. And that's all very well fine, but I don't think it would take a tremendous amount of work for you to just say, oh, sure, that's the layout of what it is now. It's just a bunch of holes in the ground. But previously, this was the basement of a castle, or it was the animal pits below a great arena.
You can show the age of a section, as in, wait, this is a lot older than the rest of the place we're exploring. What's going on here? And have that be a bit of a clue in itself that maybe there's a hidden door or a collapsed entryway here.
Yeah. Looking at all the terrible plaster and then just poking at it a little, and you can see great blocks of obsidian behind it, and you say, that's a little odd. I wonder if there's a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more to this place than just, just being a holiday home for some rich people. We can tend to fall into habits of just looking at something for its functionality rather than functionality for the game rather than its in-universe functionality. And the two don't necessarily need to match. Just because something used to be like a hotel full of swimming pools doesn't mean it's not now being remodeled into a goblin fortress with spike pits where the spa room used to be. Absolutely, things can be changed a lot, but adding the context can add a lot of flavor to the world. For example, it really helps if you're leaning into the long dead civilization trope, or even like a fall from recent grace. You putting that kind of context in really can help to sell that. You really say, oh, the ancient Fireball Empire can do things we can't because they had all these aqueducts. Now, today, the aqueducts are full of tentacle monsters, and there's no way to get onto them without hiring dragons, which are now free instead of wards of the state or whatever. Or if you're a bit more small scale, the war happened. You're all veterans of the war, and the castles that were once the centerpiece of the war are now these burned out ruins full of wandering bandits because after the war, society is starting to break down and there's a whole bunch of bandits roaming around.
Yeah, large scale traumas and catastrophes could have similar effects. I mean, like one notion that comes to mind is you could have a campaign that starts where civilization's still looking pretty healthy. You know, these castles are looking quite shiny and burnished steel or what have you on the side, and then cataclysm occurs, like the meteor hits, or the war happens, or the largest dragon ever seen, cast fire across the land, and the higher levels could be, well, trying to get through this wreckage of civilization to reach the big important area.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're, using the real world for inspiration, both disaster and slower decay can be the result of this. It doesn't necessarily need to mean that there was this horrible, violent disaster or, the great Ur dragon breathing death upon the land or, all out war. Very often, a lot of these places get banned just because of the economy. In the previous economy, this was a boom town, a resort. Rich people came here every day, but then times got tight. A lot of the rich people have moved to a completely different country for tax purposes, and no one goes to the resort anymore. So what was once a bustling summer town is now just a couple of hangers on fishing in the bay and several square miles of abandoned buildings, all really fancy looking, full of whatever type of genre appropriate adventure could be found. Maybe it's a fantasy game that's full of goblins now, or maybe it's a sci-fi thriller and you're trying to break into an old villa that now has a runaway security system to hack some mega dollars out of a mainframe or whatever.
You absolutely could have something like that. Jurassic Park comes to mind as a bit of similar inspiration.
Absolutely.
An island overrun by powerful beasts, put there for entertainment. Well, not like there's a lot you can do with that.
Manticore Park could work in many genres. That's the thing, is like, it's not that difficult to add just this a tiny pinch of whatever fantastical element is in your game to turn what's merely something creepy, like you see pictures of creepy abandoned fun fairs anywhere on the internet. Google will give you all a number of ideas, but then you just add a little bit of fantasy, like genetic experimentation, or the fairies come out of the woods if you put too many six-sided merry-go-rounds in one place. Or just, there's a serial killer or something. Whereas your classic, if you're running your classic World of Darkness or Kids on Bikes or some other modern horror genre, that kind of weird abandoned place. You mean you could have it be, oh, they're invading our homes again. It's our fault for not having shotguns as the founding fathers intended. Or you could put it into a more dynamic thing like an abandoned shopping mall. And all of a sudden, your kids on bikes with their cool parkour skills might actually have the advantage over the cops as they terrace through the serial killer terrace through the ranks of the silly adults, but cool kids outsmart him with their parkour and tech savviness. And it, I want to get
Situational advantages, yeah.
yeah, like the idea of using different types of ruins works in many genres. As we said, there's all the kinds of dungeon crawling fantasy games, or more let's call them hex crawly games, where it's not so much about, oh, this dungeon we're looting is necessarily thing, but stuff like, oh, you like things like the Lord of the Rings, where they pass through the great statues of the kings of Gondor or whatever before they get to the waterfall.
Oh yeah, like it's a memorable bit of the adventure. Like,
Or post-apocalyptic America, where you go, oh, what are these four faces in this mountain for? Or the Crazy Horse Memorial or whatever. You go back and you see these signs of, oh wow, the previous civilization or the rich people who ruined the country 10 years ago. They left these marks everywhere on the terrain, and now that you're hex crawling through this semi-abandoned wasteland, there's still these marks everywhere, and they're landmarks, and those are very useful. People know them. You could find your wandering radiation mutants say, "Oh yes, the great statue points the way to Water City, where there's a dam burst and create a second reservoir, and that means there's a half buried town with a cool fun house in it, and they execute people by putting them on the roller coaster and drive them into the lake or whatever."
yeah, no, it'd be memorable.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the likes of superhero games. What Batman game would be complete without having some wacky fist fight in like the abandoned plastic duck factory, or the memorial to the world's largest hot dog, or stuff like that?
Hmm.
In the modern day, we have the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and parking lot fights are a lot more common than Statue of Liberty fights.
Hmm.
Conveniently abandoned airports seem to be enough for people, as opposed to people doing King Kong impressions off giant water parks or the like. But, again, these are dials you'd want to do in a different genre. Is the spectacle and the silliness what you want, or are you very happy to have very ordinary downtown business district infrastructure to rip up?
Yeah, and the thing is, you can mix and match elements because, well, that's actually very plausible. Like cities, especially old cities, like have all sorts of stuff just up around. I mean, I remember seeing a documentary about Istanbul and just the sheer amount of like ancient monuments that are just part of the street. Like, you'd see some Roman carvings on a street corner.
Yeah, as I say, there's nothing to stop you saying, "Oh, this cool architecturally significant bank is a very interesting location, but its floor plan is completely wrong for the type of dungeon crawl I'm doing. I want to use this map from like Lost Caverns of Phandelver or whatever." That's no object, because you can just say, well, if we're in this abandoned ruined place, the floor plan's been changed. Everything's been remodeled by a mixture of urban decay and people stealing bricks from the walls to build their own houses, which has been a tradition practiced the world over for millennia.
Yeah, I mean, like player group, depending on the campaign, could have a very interesting advantage or perspective, say if time travel's involved.
Absolutely.
So whether they show up years, a century into the future, where well, the city center's been renovated, but they've an idea of how the old city was, so they know where the interesting hidden areas are, or they're thrown back in time and realize, oh, what's like a bunch of ruins in our time is this massive complex now, and we're going to have to figure this out.
Yeah, absolutely. The ability to sort of put time as a dimension in your game, either just abstractly or directly as through using time travel magic or what have you. That's a absolutely it's absolutely a wonderful opportunity, especially if you are in a kind of game where some players get to know their city, players or town or area or what have you. If they really get to know it, and knowing what the different pieces are and what they look like is important to them, then switching that up with a time travel sequence it has a lot of potential. Actually, now that you mentioned the degree of time and how that could vary, a lot of the advice that we were saying about, oh, this should be, you'd use an abandoned castle, an old museum about the old days, or an old military fort. Just as good a plot hook is the building site that's going to become one of those things in the future.
Yeah, building sites are can be very interesting places.
Yeah, you have either to sneak into, steal from, or just have a fight in, as you will. There are all kinds of possibilities there, and that's not even putting in the options of what is being wiped away from the old city to create the new city. You can have both. You can have a building site that is opened the way into an old ruin, and therefore you can have the new city and the old city side by side. Assuming this is the theme that you're going for your game. I think one of the probably the better genres for this kind of thing would be cyberpunk, actually,
Oh yeah.
because cyberpunk is all about the big glorious future, but what does that big glorious future leave behind? Who's been left in the margins? Who's being crushed by the unrelenting capitalism? And what are these unrelenting capitalists building in its place? So you can definitely have this thing where after a couple of sessions of the players, running nets and hacking cybers, one of the big corporations just turns their downtown headquarters into a tax write off and flies off to some newly minted nation in the near Middle East to set up a new international headquarters. And all of a sudden, so there's this gigantic, brutalist block of concrete and glass and glittery neon in the middle of the city, and no one's quite sure who's going to buy it because there's this all these legal battles between the vestiges of the government and all the different people bidding for the place. And meanwhile, there's someone squatting in it, or there's rumors that someone has left the files for the
Oh, ho, ho.
CEOs behind. There's an adventure right there for any good set of cyberpunks.
Absolutely.
Or assuming they don't want to commit some kind of vast property fraud and try to buy the place themselves or sublet it.
Or vandalize it spectacularly.
All wonderful options. But do we want to go over some maybe more out there examples? We've given a few as we've gone.
Ooh, out there examples. There's always a rumble in, I know, the world's largest ice cream shop.
Yeah, absolutely perfect for a superhero game or a street level game. I'm sure a lot of lower cyberpunks will get away with that. A couple I thought of: abandoned prisons, particularly if you're doing an Alcatraz pastiche and it's out in an isolated island, and you just have this rusty old place out in the island. Once the great inescapable prison, and that's a pretty good, cool site for a number of horrible curses or criminal hideaways.
Yep, I can remember at least a season of The Walking Dead where they were holed up in a prison and were making, like the main characters were making quite a good go of it.
Yeah, mentioned the Great World's Fair site and other sort of architectural follies in general. Just it's the point was the art of the whole thing. I mean, you ever go up to, if you're in Dublin, you ever go up to St Anne's Park, the north end of St Anne's Park. You'll turn a corner through a few trees and you'll just come across the most random piece of Roman architecture you'll ever see in inner city Dublin. All that kind of stuff could be very happy. Actually, the parks and the grounds of old, not necessarily castles. Castles are sort of a normal dungeon type, but of a palace. And you have the great lands around a palace and the old gardens, and you have what was once a hedge maze, but is now like it's a forest. Or
Or overgrown even. But there's always, well, as you say, palaces specifically. There was quite a few built by one King Ludwig II of Bavaria.
yeah,
And this also ties into what you were saying about follies, as in these were architecturally spectacular pieces, let's just say, like Wanstein Castle, which, and I'm sure I've butchered that pronunciation.
Yeah, I believe there's actually a couple of board games around those castles because the act of constructing them is probably as interesting as going to look at them. But yeah, particularly if you're the type of GM who's not just stuck on a floor plan for your castle dungeon, but are willing to let the players climb outside and do some second story work, only to find that the second story doesn't exist. There's just a first story and a third story, and several crenellated towers. Weird architecture like that can be very interesting if you're turning it into a navigation puzzle. Other things that come to mind, separate from castles, but in a more modern genre, forts, like old sea forts, like you'd have in the 19th century, where most of the time all the cannons and cannonballs and gunpowder has been gone away. I would just have these interesting, like, set of bunkers and things, and they'll often be very near to towns, waterways. Perfect place to have smugglers if you're in that particular genre, or if you're in a sort of Age of Sail type game, pirates, or even the fort might be where a pirate that's been caught has been imprisoned inside the fort, and it's a rundown fort with only a couple of guns, and you can't get clustered in your ship, but you need to get inside to rescue the pirate king, and he'll lead you to treasure or whatever. Alternatively, if you're in a more Western inspired game, then a fort might mean something very different. It might appear to just be a collection of logs in the ground, but it can get very elaborate if you've got like entire regiment of you get something like where an entire regiment or battalion of the army came through here during a questionable cleanup operation, and now they've left this fort for several thousand soldiers, and it's now manned by half a dozen regulars from the next town over. All kinds of shenanigans can get up to there. Also, just stuff like infrastructure. If you're going for more of a post-apocalyptic or even lost glories of Rome sort of feel,
I mean, like finding the ruins of the ancient city of New York.
yeah, absolutely. And the Grand Station. We in Ireland are not exactly blessed with the most fantastic of rail and road infrastructure, but still, look, you go into the middle of Connolly Station or Pearse Street Station, you look up into the old 19th century glasswork up there. It's not nothing. It's
Yeah,
an interesting bit of
absolutely.
construction, and it's 90% of the bridges in this and raised roadways in this city are because of the train system. There's definitely something to it, but it all pales in comparison to stuff that you'll see all over the place in Europe and America. And you have these massive cavernous train stations. What happens if there's no trains? All of a sudden, it's just a sort of abandoned place. Actually, I'm pretty sure if you go to Detroit and look around the old train stations there, you'll get a very good idea. If you're looking for inspiration for your post-apocalyptic cyberpunk game, just Google Detroit. I think you'll get quite a bit of material there. But other kind of infrastructure. When I was playing Fallout 3, one of the big landmarks you'd get in going through Fallout 3 would be the overhanging highway sections.
Oh yeah,
Like you'd see all kinds of pieces of road suspended, and you'd be looking up and wondering what's going on up there. And then every so often you'd find some way to climb on, and you'd find this entire small raider town just built on top of a isolated section of highway next to a hill, or a collapsed section buried in a lake somewhere, and just covered in rusted cars turned into like a barricade. But yeah, you get some, and this could work with disasters like Fallout, but also just again economic decline of this area. You might have a place that has an abandoned harbor.
yeah. Sure, the original Deus Ex game was set like years after economic crash, so you had a lot of areas in the real, like say, real world cities that are now that are in that game setting, like just aged and just run down, but recognizable as landmarks.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're skipping genres again, sci-fi stuff. If you're in like how often is what the U.S. Enterprise flying along? How often does it just come into what to ancient aliens 10,000 years ago would have just been the equivalent of a roundabout on the road for us, but to them is this gigantic space station that's able to fold time and space. Actually, Mass Effect is probably a good example of this because they're coming along and they're trying to build their civilizations around this ancient million-year-old infrastructure to warp them from place to place. They had no idea how any of it, who made it, or how any of it works. That's the kind of thing you were doing. Is suddenly you could basically use sci-fi or magical infrastructure that the civilization that you're playing in has no idea what to do with it, but it's there. And if you're particularly enterprising or villainous sort, you can use it for all kinds of purposes of various levels of niceness or nefariousness. I'm thinking now of Eberron. Eberron has this thing where it's this sort of dungeon punk setting where magic is used by everyone.
Yeah, no, industrialized even.
Yeah, it's got industrialized magic, but it's also a post-war setting, so there's all this ruined war architecture all over the place. So you'll have
It's literally a country that got wiped out, and
yeah, and like there's all kinds of ideas. Okay, so they used to have like magical trains going to and fro. Except now there's this horrible bombed out shell of a country in the middle that cuts the two halves of the rail network in half.
yeah, a bit of an issue that.
But hey, what else can we use? If we were able to sneak into the Morn lands and hijack all those magical towers, could you do something else other than run trains? Do you want to fix the trains? Or do you want to start using it as some kind of railgun to just launch wreckage at people?
Oh boy.
I'm sure people have used that as a thing, but you don't even need to go into the Mornland for that kind of thing. You can just on the old front lines between Thrain and Brayland. There's this fortress that they fought over for 20 years, and it's just full of ancient weapons and summoned demons and arcane artillery pieces. And because of the treaty that was signed, neither side can go anywhere near it. But so a band of independent adventurers, they could go in whenever they wanted.
Well, if they aren't too attached to life,
Yeah, well, no one said it was a great idea. It's merely a possibility, and that is what we're sort of going here. Is that adding a little, getting inspiration or adding flavor to a location can be just as easy as breaking it a little or putting it in the process of being broken or even being restored. That can add a lot of flavor to a place. And perhaps maybe that will inspire your players. Maybe they will come across this ancient abandoned folly of 100 years ago, all the gods came together and they built 1,000 temples upon this hill. And then they had the God War and blew each other up and stuff. It's just like, well, we do kind of want to have a couple of gods still around. Let's start renovating the place. How we fund this? Dungeon crawling.
well, I mean, how else do you fund it?
Exactly. That's sort of an idea or set of ideas that you could explore. Just use modern day or historical architecture, patterns of the rise and fall of different sites, or even just thinking in the future as what are those going to be in 100 years. And you can get an awful lot of inspiration for your game, for locations, and it should, in many a genre, location is everything.
Yeah, I think we could leave it there.
If there is another abandoned, forlorn location which has been cursed by all the gods that you can come to, it's our Discord. Link in the show notes and find us and renovate this place that is near and dear to our hearts. But for now, this party's over. Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there or talk to our Twitter account at AdventurePTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.